From multiple delayed openings to injured riders, Icebreaker has certainly had its fair share of complications. But is it a failure? Let's find out. I'm gonna rank every coaster and give them a review. Every drop and every hill, every launch and every loop. Rate it 1 to 10 and then we'll do it all again. Gonna rank and review every coaster. What's going on, everybody? My name is Mario. This is a channel all about amusement park type stuff, but mostly coasters. And today in my never-ending journey to rank and review every single coaster I have ever been on, we're going to be talking about Icebreaker at SeaWorld Orlando. And we have to start off by looking at this ride's shortcomings, because to be completely honest, I just find them fascinating. But if you'd prefer to skip straight to the review of the actual ride experience, here's a timestamp for you. But for everyone else, without any further ado, let's review. Icebreaker was first announced in 2019 as SeaWorld Orlando's first launch coaster, with an expected opening sometime in 2020. This ride would contain 2 forwards launches, 2 backwards launches, and Florida's steepest drop, with a 100-degree beyond vertical spike. While those are some intense stats, Icebreaker would be marketed as an attraction that the entire family could enjoy.
A backwards launch and another forwards launch, rocketing you to 52 miles per hour. That all sounds really thrilling, and it sure is, but the ride is accessible for the entire family with a 48-inch tall rider height requirement.
The 48-inch height requirement was a big selling point. All of SeaWorld's major coasters prior to Icebreaker had a height requirement of 54 inches. For shorter guests looking for a coaster fix, they were left to choose between Journey to Atlantis, which is a water ride with one small section of coaster track, or Super Grover's Boxcar Derby, which is a bona fide kiddie coaster. So it was clear that Icebreaker was intended to fill a glaring gap in SeaWorld Orlando's coaster lineup. But the marketing around the coaster was definitely a bit confusing. On one hand, you had promotional material showcasing the ride's excitement and intensity, and on the other hand, you had press releases ensuring the family friendliness and accessibility of Icebreaker. You also had this really scary graphic for the ride that was used in all of the promotion for it, and it still haunts me in my dreams. I mean, you have a child's face photoshopped onto this grown man's body, and then you have this little girl back here that is like 6'5", and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Pun most definitely intended. Anyway, we're going to stop looking at that and pretend it never existed. Now, in early 2020, as construction on Icebreaker progressed and the project neared completion, the world was hit with what I like to call the big yucky of 2020. This obviously affected theme parks around the world and would end up delaying the opening of Icebreaker several times. Despite SeaWorld Orlando reopening only a few months after closing for COVID, the park decided to shift the opening date of Icebreaker into spring of 2021. While many people were disappointed by this, most were relatively understanding due to the unprecedented circumstances. However, spring came and went, and Icebreaker's opening was delayed again, this time to 2022. People were much less forgiving this time around, as Icebreaker had been heavily featured in promotional material for the 2021 season, including ads encouraging consumers to buy passes specifically to ride Icebreaker. And while people were understandably upset, time goes on, and with 2022, Icebreaker would finally see its first public riders. The coaster now had an official opening date of February 18th, but held pass holder previews on select dates prior. And while there was plenty to be said about Orlando's newest coaster, one thing was clear. It was much more aggressive and intense than anyone had anticipated.
That was so much more intense. The airtime is so violent.
The first hill, you get murdered.
Literally get murdered.
It's more forceful than what I thought it was going to be.
I actually feel a little nauseous.
It was surprisingly thrilling.
Yeah.
This park needs a family coaster, and this is billed as the family coaster, but it's
You think it's a little too thrilling
It's
for that?
kind of extreme.
This left many people, including myself, wondering why a ride that was designed with children and families in mind was so aggressive. Now, February 18th saw the ceremonious grand opening for Icebreaker, with the continued messaging that Icebreaker was a great ride for all ages.
Icebreaker is the perfect family coaster. We wanted it to be family thrill. So we have a 48-inch height requirement.
Only one day after officially opening, Icebreaker saw its minimum height requirement increase a full 6 inches. This meant that the minimum height for every major coaster in the park would remain at 54 inches. Understandably, this infuriated families visiting the park. After all, Icebreaker had operated for the entirety of season pass holder previews with the 48-inch height requirement. So why the sudden change? While nobody knows the exact reason, it's possible SeaWorld had a sudden change of heart and realized that the ride was just too intense for younger riders. Another possibility is much more unfortunate. According to a quarterly report provided by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, on February 7th, 2022, a 12-year-old boy sustained an injury to his leg after riding Icebreaker. Injuries only need to be reported to this department if they result in a hospital stay of 24 hours or longer. So, a young rider was hospitalized after riding Icebreaker, which is obviously horrible. And like I said, we don't know the exact details of everything that happened, but it is very possible that SeaWorld changed the height requirement to reduce the likelihood of injury to smaller guests. And I honestly can't help but speculate that there may have been other more minor injuries that weren't required to be reported, because this specific incident happened weeks before the ride changed its height requirement. But that's all speculation, of course. With all that aside, was the ride still well received? Well, from what I've seen, yes, but it seems to be a mixed reaction. Some people praise the ride's unexpected aggression and intensity, while others find the experience to be a bit uncomfortable or even underwhelming in some cases. I'd also have to imagine that Icebreaker doesn't live up to the expectations that SeaWorld had for it, as it regularly has one of the shortest waits in the park, despite having a very low capacity. So, in conclusion, is Icebreaker a failure? Yeah. Well, I definitely do recognize that SeaWorld and this project faced numerous complications, many of which were out of their control. I really don't think that this ride delivered what it was supposed to. It's a family thrill coaster that now has a height requirement of 54 inches and is arguably more aggressive than the other major coasters in the park. The marketing for it was confusing, and ultimately it underperformed. Now, that being said, I am sure that SeaWorld saw at least somewhat of an increase in attendance due to this new attraction opening up. And there are definitely plenty of people out there that enjoy this ride, don't get me wrong. And that's great, I'm glad they do. But in my opinion, I just do not think Icebreaker was a success. But now let's do a little ride review, shall we? And let's start that with the off-ride experience. Icebreaker is located right next to SeaWorld's lake, giving it a pleasant off-ride appearance. I'm not the biggest fan of the colors of the ride, however, but I am glad SeaWorld went with something other than blue. Coming up to the entrance, Icebreaker has an amazing looking sign, which lights up and looks even better at night. This is complemented nicely by large ice facades next to the sign. Before entering though, you do have to put your loose articles into a locker, and Icebreaker is much more strict about loose articles than any of the other rides in the park. Mako, for example, will let you leave, say, a hat off to the side of the platform, but Icebreaker does require you to either tuck it away and ride with it or put it in a locker before entering the line. As far as operations go, even though this ride is relatively low capacity, it does have the ability to run with 2 trains, and it has fairly fast operations. Once you get up to the loading station, you will be grouped to a specific row, meaning you do not get to pick your row, and this is going to bleed into our on-ride experience, but you better hope that you don't get put into the 3rd, 6th, or 9th row, because holy heck, difference in leg room between those 3rd rows and the first 2 rows of each car is abysmal. As you can see in this picture right here, the guests in the 3rd row of each car have almost no legroom whatsoever, which does force your shins to be pushed up against the coaster's shin restraints, causing extreme discomfort. And in my case personally, I had bruises that lasted over a week because these restraints suck. But now that you're finally in the train, let's go through the ride's layout. You're dispatched onto a switch track, which slowly moves you horizontally to your right. And this is pretty fun and unique. Not too many rides start off this way, so that's definitely a plus. Soon after, you experience the ride's first launch, which is a very, very weak backwards launch, up a small little airtime hill that is then followed by the ride's 100-degree vertical spike. And unless you are sitting in the back car, neither of these elements do a single thing. In the very back, you do get the tiniest bit of floater airtime, but it's so negligible that I genuinely think that this ride could have just started with a forwards launch, because this backwards launch serves no purpose whatsoever. Anyway, coming down, you barely experience anything either before hitting the launch track again, and the second launch is the tiniest bit more forceful, and the hill that follows provides the tiniest bit more floater airtime. The airtime is definitely more noticeable in the front, but it's still nothing special up there either. You fall back down into your third launch, which is finally giving you a decent amount of speed, and the following hill provides very strong airtime this time, although it is very abrupt and in my opinion kind of awkward, as is unfortunately going to be the theme for a lot of the airtime moments on this ride. In contrast, the airtime that you experience on the spike after this third launch is phenomenal and one of my favorite parts of the ride. If you are sitting in the back car, even in the second to last car, you are getting great floater airtime. You are out of your seat for a good 3, maybe even more seconds, and it feels very comfortable and natural. It's not super abrupt, it actually lasts, it's sustained. It is a very, very enjoyable airtime moment. Coming down into your fourth launch, you experience similar airtime as when you were going backwards, and then after that launch, you hit what is the strongest moment of airtime on the ride, but also my least favorite by far. At this point, I should also mention that I personally, and even other seasoned coaster enthusiasts that I know, are experiencing mild nausea at this point, just from going back and forth so much. This beginning sequence of the ride where you're just doing launch, 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 feels a lot more like a flat ride than a roller coaster. I do appreciate that this exists to pad the coaster's ride time, but the first two launches barely do anything, and even people that aren't prone to motion sickness get a little bit of motion sickness in this sequence, making this ride really hard to re-ride. But anyway, this airtime moment is so abrupt that you are back in your seat before you even realize you left it, and those restrictive restraints are very, very uncomfortable with the amount of negative G's you are experiencing here. I know some people absolutely adore this element of the ride, and I can see why, but it is definitely not for me. You then head into the top hat, which is the other moment of airtime that I truly enjoy on this coaster. It is strong, but not as painful, and it is much more sustained. I mean, you're getting airtime before you even touch the top of this top hat in every row. This is a genuinely good part of the ride and not too uncomfortable. The drop down that top hat feels relatively steep as well, and you pick up some good speed following the drop. You then turn into two small bunny hills that deliver airtime that is not as strong, but just as awkward as that first little hop before the top hat. And at this point, my stomach is just being shaken up. Again, I can't stress how much I don't care for this airtime. It just feels like someone is picking you up and just giving you a shake. It doesn't feel like you're actually getting airtime. But some people like these little small bursts, just again, not for me. You head into this upward turn that is relatively tight and provides some mild positive G-forces before twisting out to your left. And I have to be honest, I was a little disappointed with this part of the ride. I thought it was going to provide some good laterals, but I don't think you're traversing that twist fast enough to experience any laterals throwing you side to side. The trend of underwhelming elements with a lack of forces continues with this sort of wave turn. It doesn't offer much by the way of lateral G-forces, nor does it offer any airtime either. It's just kind of there. It is cool to be traveling sideways, I suppose, but your body doesn't feel much going through this element. There's another left-hand turn that turns into a right banked turn that don't do anything. And then you have one last little awkward ejector hill before going up into the brakes that also provides a pretty solid pop of airtime. So, what would I rank this coaster? I think it's a nice concept, a decent layout, but it is hard to enjoy with the amount of discomfort I feel. And again, this This is inexcusable. That all being said, I give it a 5.5 out of 10. And I think if you like this really aggressive, abrupt style of airtime, and you're able to overlook or maybe not even experience the discomfort that I felt, then you are going to genuinely like this ride. And as far as where Icebreaker ranks amongst the 241 other coasters that I've been on so far, it sits at 102. But I've already talked about Icebreaker way too much. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments down below. Go ahead and give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. And make sure to tune in next time where I'll be talking about whatever this wheel lands on. The wheel looks a little rigged. 'Cause it is. I want to talk about Carowinds.